Try to remember the last time you were actually bored. Not nothing to watch bored. Actually completely mind-empty bored. Can't remember? That's not an accident. That's a design flaw and it's yours. Now go back 50,000 years. No screens, no notifications, no scroll to save you from an empty afternoon. Just you, a fire, and hours of absolutely nothing scheduled. And here's the part that doesn't add up. They weren't bored either. Not the way we are. Stick around because the reason why says something uncomfortable about what we've done to our own brains. Picture the gap. A hunt is over. The food is stored. The tools are made. Hours are left in the day with nothing that has to happen. That's the exact condition that wrecks us now. Give a modern brain unstructured time and it panics, reaches for a phone, fills the silence with anything. So what did early humans do with that same gap? Because they had it constantly. And whatever filled it clearly worked, since it kept an entire species sane for a few 100,000 years running. Here's the assumption most people carry around without noticing. Boredom feels ancient. Feels like something baked into being human since the beginning. It isn't. Researchers who study attention and reward have started asking a much stranger question. Not why do we get bored, but when did boredom even become possible? Because boredom requires something specific, a gap between what your brain expects and what's actually happening. Machinery for anticipating stimulation, and machinery that gets restless when that stimulation doesn't arrive. Both of those exist in the human brain, but here's the twist. That machinery didn't evolve to punish an empty afternoon. It evolved to solve a completely different problem, and somewhere along the way, we broke it. So what was it actually built for? Attention span, in the ancient sense, wasn't about sitting still and consuming something. It was about scanning. Constantly, quietly, cheaply. Scanning the environment for anything that changed. A rustle in grass, a shift in wind, a new track in mud that wasn't there yesterday. The brain's restlessness wasn't a bug demanding entertainment. It was a survival tool that never fully switched off, and it had an entire world to scan. That's the piece we lost first, not the restlessness, the world worth scanning. Think about what actually filled the gap between tasks. Not stories, not yet. Something smaller. Attention itself pointed outward. A hand running along the grain of a stick, testing where it might split. Eyes tracking a beetle across dirt for no reason except that it was there and it moved. None of that required a task. None of it required being told to notice. It just required a world that kept giving you something to notice all day without asking. Modern boredom isn't a lack of stimulation. It's a lack of stimulation worth generating your own attention for. And that's the sentence worth sitting with for a second because it flips the whole problem around. Here's where it gets stranger. In 2014, a set of psychology studies asked people to sit alone in a room, no phone, no book, nothing. Just their thoughts. Some of those rooms had one object in them. A button wired to deliver a mild electric shock. Given the choice between sitting with their own mind or shocking themselves, a striking number of people chose the shock. Not because they enjoyed pain, because sitting with an unoccupied mind was worse. That result got repeated, picked apart, argued over for years. Some researchers say it overstates things, that people shock themselves out of curiosity, not desperation. Fair point. But even the skeptics don't dispute the core finding. An empty mind, with nothing scanning, nothing anticipating, is deeply uncomfortable for the modern brain. The question that actually matters is why an ancient brain, built with the exact same wiring, apparently didn't have that problem nearly as often. The honest answer, it probably did have the problem. Just not for very long because idle attention almost never had to run on nothing. It had a whole sensory field to work with constantly. Ancient boredom wasn't absent. It was interrupted before it could build over and over by a world that never stopped offering something small to track. Compare that to right now. A modern brain that runs out of external things to scan doesn't sit in silence and wait. It reaches for something engineered specifically to solve that itch instantly, permanently on demand. That's not a coincidence. That's an entire industry built directly on top of a gap our ancestors almost never experienced long enough to name. There's a second piece to this, and it's the one that gets left out of almost every version of this story. Idle attention wasn't just scanning outward, some of it turned inward, and that's where something specific started happening. Anthropologists studying groups who still live without agriculture or modern technology have noted something consistent across very different environments. Long stretches of unstructured time, the kind that would make a modern person anxious within minutes, tend to produce something specific, not restlessness, reflection. Long silences that aren't awkward, staring that isn't distracted, it's processing. One researcher who spent years documenting daily life in communities like this described watching people sit for what looked, from the outside, like doing absolutely nothing for what would have been an entire uninterrupted hour by modern standards. Nobody filled it. Nobody seemed to need it filled. That's the part that should stop you. The capacity to sit inside an empty stretch of time without needing to escape it isn't a trait some people are born with and others aren't. It's a skill. And skills atrophy the second you stop practicing them. We stopped practicing around the time we built machines specifically designed to make sure we never had to. Here's the mechanism, and it's simpler than it sounds. Every scroll, every autoplay, every notification exploits the exact same ancient scanning instinct that used to track beetles and broken twigs. Same circuitry, same reward pathway, same restless attention looking for something new. Except now the something new arrives every 4 seconds instead of every 4 minutes, engineered by people whose entire job is keeping that gap from ever opening wide enough for you to notice it's there. Which means the scanning instinct never gets to finish its actual job. It used to scan, find something, process it, and then rest briefly until the next thing appeared naturally. Now it scans, gets fed instantly, and never actually rests. The muscle that used to sit comfortably in silence between meals is now sprinting constantly and never once getting to walk. This is where the story usually turns nostalgic, and it shouldn't. Ancient life wasn't calm because it was simple. It was calm because attention had room to breathe between demands. That's not the same as having nothing to do. It's having enough to do that your mind stays engaged, but not so much that it never gets a gap. We built a world with infinite demands on attention and called the byproduct entertainment. Somewhere in that trade, the gap disappeared, and so did our tolerance for it. There's one more layer worth naming before this lands. Boredom, the modern kind, the phone-reaching kind, isn't actually about having nothing to do. It's about the discomfort of a mind that's forgotten how to generate its own direction. Ancient minds didn't need to generate direction from nothing because the environment kept offering small, real, physical things to track. Modern minds do need to generate it constantly because most of what surrounds us was built to demand attention rather than reward the noticing of it. That's the actual difference, not less stimulation back then. Less stimulation that was handed to them, and more that they had to notice for themselves. So next time an empty afternoon starts feeling unbearable within about 90 seconds, here's what's actually happening underneath it. That's not boredom in any ancient sense. That's a scanning instinct still fully intact, still working exactly the way it always has, dropped into a world that never lets it finish a single scan on its own. The instinct isn't broken. The silence around it is just gone.